Hello and welcome to the Farming Today podcast with me, Charlotte Smith. In this episode, a gentle parliamentary rebellion over inheritance tax. But let's start with the weather. Now, in a moment we'll hear the bad news, but let's at least start positive. It has been a bumper year for many cider producers. One of those who have benefited is Newton Court near Leominster in Herefordshire. Here they've produced 100,000 litres this year, compared with 67,000 last year. You might imagine it is now time to put their feet up. But no. All this week we're talking about winter jobs on farms, and there are a host of them on a fruit farm, as Bob Huckenhall discovered.
Out in his orchard, cider farmer Paul Stevens is preparing his apple trees for pruning, a job that's going to keep him occupied through most of the winter. So can you explain what you're doing at the moment, Paul?
What I'm doing is removing the barbed wire and the wire mesh around from the trunk of the tree so that we can gain access to the trunk and to prune back the shoots that are coming from the trunk. What we don't want happening is these shoots growing on up and becoming part of the tree, because the variety of the tree is grafted onto the top, so the trunk is the what we call a stem builder. We need to stop these shoots from developing anymore.
Because if they do, it'll spoil your crop for next year, will it?
Well, what will happen is you'll have a different variety of apple will start to develop rather than the variety of apple that we want, because this tree starts life is three parts. You've got the root, then you've got what we call a stem builder is grafted onto that root, and then on top of the stem builder is the variety of apple that we want. So what's happening here is that the stem builder is sending out its own little shoots together with its own little varieties of apple. We don't want those apples.
How much of your time will this take during the winter season?
This is a job that we'll do all through the winter now. We've got about 200 trees here, and it's a very time-consuming job.
There's more work for Paul inside in the cidery, where the fermentation process continues in large cider tanks.
The fruit sugar in the cider, in the apple juice, is turning into alcohol. It's a very important part of the process, because we want to ensure that all that fruit sugar turns into alcohol and it doesn't stop due to a cold snap.
And how long will it take for this cider to be ready?
It'll depend on how warm it is, the ambient temperature, but typically it's anything between 6 to 8 weeks.
Back outside, there's more work, remedying the problems caused by disease. Affected trees need to be removed and replaced. So, Paul, what are you doing here?
Today's job is gapping up the pear tree. We've had a bit of trouble with fire blight in our orchard, so some trees have died, and we're planting a replacement tree.
And do you have to do much of that?
Yes, sadly we've lost quite a few pear trees in the last year or two, and due to a disease called fire blight. It's a disease that comes in on the blossom in the spring.
Have you any idea how much replanting you've got to do this winter?
We've lost about 50 trees.
Apple grower Paul Stevens there. Well, many arable farmers didn't enjoy the summer drought at all. In fact, one think tank has put the estimated cost at £828 million. The Energy and Climate Intelligence Unit, or ECIU, says farmers will lose the income as a result of the second worst harvest on record in England, where crops were hit by a very hot spring and summer, as well as the resulting lack of water. Tom Lancaster is Land, Food and Farming Analyst at the ECIU. He told me that while farmers are used to the vagaries of the weather, climate change means the challenges are growing.
What we're seeing increasingly is there's a lot more rough than there is smooth for particularly broadacre arable farmers who are, I think really we're only just coming to realise, particularly exposed to the increasingly extreme weather that we're seeing with climate change. You know, those farmers really have got nowhere to hide. A lot of these crops aren't irrigated, and they're really dependent on on the weather effectively. And if it doesn't play ball, as it increasingly isn't, then they're really exposed to the impacts of that. And farmers are just finding it increasingly difficult to adapt and manage those impacts on their businesses. And it's really starting, I think, to take a toll, not just on their businesses, but in terms of their own sort of health and well-being as well.
So what are farmers to do? We've spoken to farmers who are considering more irrigation, but they're growing more valuable crops like vegetables or potatoes. It's not, generally speaking, worth irrigating a cereal crop. Do you think that will change, or will people change what they grow?
What we'll probably need to see change really is sort of government and the supply chain taking the resilience of our sort of farming sectors, not just arable, but livestock, horticulture and others much more seriously in terms of how we can manage those impacts and the impacts that we're likely to see as the effects of climate change worsen. So from our perspective, the sort of green farming schemes that DEFRA are bringing forward in England are an important part of that. So those schemes can help farmers sort of build their resilience to these impacts. You've already seen that with some of the sort of farming advocates for regenerative agriculture or nature-friendly farming, climate-friendly farming, whatever you want to call it, seeing the evidence of those benefits in their soils and in increased numbers of pollinators, all of which can help build resilience to the sorts of extreme weather impacts that we've seen. You also, I think, will need to see the supply chain taking this a bit more seriously in terms of investing in their suppliers to be able to guarantee a sufficient supply of sort of homegrown produce into UK shops and supermarket aisles. And again, I think you're starting to see supermarkets realise the importance of domestic supply and ensuring the sort of resilience of that in the face of climate impacts, with some of the big retailers investing significant investments into their supplier base in recent months.
Tom Lancaster. A pioneering project to help crews on fishing boats manage the unpredictability of their earnings has been launched in Cornwall. Fishing is about as far from a 9-to-5 job as you can get, with weather conditions, fuel prices and market demand, meaning that one week crews will earn, but the next they won't. Well, now Citizens Advice Cornwall, along with other local groups, has set up Net Savings, a government-backed collaboration to help fishing crews with financial advice, with experts available right on the quayside. William Wong from Citizens Advice Cornwall told me why it's needed.
It is the unpredictable nature of fishing that you don't know when you're going to be able to get out to sea because of the weather. It's also variable income, so you may get a good month and you may get a couple of months where you don't get any money coming in at all. And in terms of the way the benefit system works, particularly universal credit, that is quite problematic. Everything is hinged towards a monthly income. There are other issues as well, of course, as lots of things like banking and applications for all sorts of grants and benefits are moving online. That's very hard to access if you're out at sea. So filling out a 30-page form isn't ideal. And the final one really is a bit like some people in the farming community. The fishing community is always very proud and rightfully self-reliant. There is a little bit of independence and hesitancy to get advice.
Many people, though, work in fishing their whole lives. They're used to the way that this works. Surely they've learnt over the years just to manage money.
Normally, yes, but things have got a lot more complicated for everyone. And I think there are quite a lot of people in the fishing community that we know are struggling financially, but just don't have the time to actually get the help. So although we've talked quite a lot about the financial side, there are other issues that we can help with, such as housing and debt, which are particular issues in coastal communities where there are a lot of holiday homes. So it's not just the financial element.
And all of this is just a perfect recipe, isn't it, for people coming in and offering these quick loans at mad interest rates?
Absolutely, yes. And we know, sadly, certainly in some other parts of the country, that loan sharks have been quite active for a number of years. They sort of jump in and fill the gap when times are tough. But, of course, they're entirely unregulated and illegal. And it means that they can charge whatever interest rates they like. So, yeah, people are quite vulnerable to the activities of loan sharks, which is something that our advisors are very aware of.
What then can you offer with this new collaboration, Net Savings?
Well, what we want to do, our normal advice service, where we look at all sorts of issues that people come to us with, so it may be quite a lot of people are entitled to benefits that they don't even realise, so we can run benefits checks for them. There may be a debt issue, which our debt advisors can look into. As we mentioned before, housing as well is another issue. So all sorts of things that people could normally access citizens' advice for, but we're just making it more accessible.
Waylin Wong from Citizens Advice Cornwall. A Labour MP who voted against the government on the plan to reimpose inheritance tax on farms has had the whip suspended. A group of Labour MPs representing rural constituencies abstained on the vote earlier this week and have urged the government to think again. This is the ongoing row over the government's plan to reimpose inheritance tax on farming and business assets over £1 million, which was introduced in last year's budget and is due to take effect from April next year. Ministers insist the plan is fair and say it's time to move on. Paul Seddon is a BBC political reporter. He told me why MPs are only getting the chance to vote on this measure now.
Last year, Labour ministers did avoid a kind of parliamentary skirmish over the measure because it wasn't included in the legislation to give effect to last year's budget. But of course, it will be included in the law to deliver this year's budget, which is expected to be debated in the coming months. Now, what MPs were voting on Tuesday was what's called a budget resolution, which basically just gives the initial parliamentary authorisation to go ahead with the change whilst the detailed legislation is drawn up. Now, of course, for those Labour MPs who do have concerns about the policy, it's also a useful way to put those concerns on the record and to deliver, if you like, a kind of shot across the ministerial bows ahead of the main debate.
So how many Labour MPs decided to do that?
Well, we should say there's only one Labour MP who actually voted against the government. That's Marcus Campbell-Savers, the MP for Penrith and Solway in Cumbria. But there's a much bigger number, around 80 Labour MPs, who did not record a vote. Now, it's important to point out not all of those MPs were necessarily rebelling. Some may have been given permission to not take part or perhaps didn't vote for another reason. But there have been estimates that around 30 of those MPs were actively abstaining. Now, that's not enough to defeat the government, but it is big enough to present ministers with a political headache.
The farming minister has told us again and again that nothing is going to change on this policy. Is there any sign that anyone's reconsidering it?
Well, of course, the Treasury did make one concession last week at the budget, which is that the unused parts of the allowance before the inheritance tax applies will be transferable to a spouse. But the Treasury are continuing to insist overall that this is a fair way to raise funds for public services. And they're saying that the allowance is now a generous level of relief. Now, the National Farmers Union had been urging Labour MPs to abstain at this point to try and put pressure on ministers. I think opposition MPs will almost certainly try and amend the budget legislation when it comes. Labour MPs can bring forward amendments, but if those are defeated, it would be a much bigger deal for them to actually vote against the government, which may feel at this stage it's already taken the political hit.
Labour do have an unusual party management situation here, don't they?
Yeah, exactly. This is a slightly surprising problem for Labour, which has not really had a very large contingency of rural MPs, at least in recent years. But of course, that landslide victory last year at the election did deliver this decent chunk of MPs in more rural seats, some of whom may not have expected to win, overturned very, very big Conservative majorities and now are sitting on quite slim majorities themselves going into the next election.
Paul Seddon. That's it from us this morning. I'm Charlotte Smith. The producer is Sally Challoner, and Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.